After one of their test subjects dies, an underground research facility is placed under scrutiny. What their investigator finds, however, is a secret that could put all their lives and the world in peril. Captain Hickok arrives near a closed-off military research facility where he's escorted by engineer Tommy Shivers. As they drive closer to the facility, Hickok explains that he's there to investigate the research-related deaths as part of the standard procedure. Tommy's thankful since he thinks all the researchers have gone crazy from isolation. They soon descend to the underground research facility. Tommy leads their guest to the main lab but struggles to open the doors until Dr. Earhart approaches, welcoming Hickok to Project Shadow Zone. She manages to open the lab door for them but insists on letting Hickok have a meal first. During dinner in the pantry, Earhart apologizes for not inviting the rest of the researchers since they're working late at night. Still, Hickok intends to meet the rest of the team after his meal, along with the body of the deceased. Feeling the sudden tension, Tommy calls out for the cook, Mrs. Cutter, for desserts. However, the woman serves them a dead rat, which she caught in her kitchen since Tommy hasn't sealed the air vents yet. She threatens him to fix it within 24 hours. Otherwise, she'll serve more questionable food. After dinner, Earhart leads Hickok to meet their researchers, noting that she's been working for their head scientist, Van Fleet, for 5 years. They soon arrive in the animal holding room where Dr. Kidwell greets them. Earhart tells her that Hickok's here to see the body and, without the captain noticing, they exchange knowing looks. The two lead the man to the exam room where Hickok recoils upon seeing the bloody corpse on the examination table, recently processed for autopsy. Kidwell claims that the man, Hawkins, died from a stroke, but Hickok asks if it was somehow caused by the project. The women deny it. Earhart leads their guests next to the control room of the lab where the technician, Wiley, greets Hickok. From the viewing window, the captain sees the sealed lab where 2 pods contain a sleeping man and woman. Wiley soon signals Hickok to go to the next room, so he and Earhart don protective goggles and head inside. There, Dr. Van Fleet greets their guest while Earhart leaves the men to talk. Van Fleet then introduces Hickok to one of their sleeping subjects, Jenna, who's there to replace Hawkins. The second subject is James. The 2 subjects have had their cerebral cortex severed from their lower brainstem to induce an extended deep sleep or EDS. Van Fleet assures Hickok that it was safely done and the subjects will only wake once their cortex is reconnected. According to the study, the severance protects the subject from brain death. Hickok wonders if the process is what caused Hawkins' death, but Van Fleet asserts that it's impossible since their tests have determined that he didn't have any damage to the brain or nerve tissue. Instead, the doctor believes that Hawkins had a cerebral hemorrhage, which is more common than people think. Sensing the captain isn't convinced, Van Fleet suggests continuing the investigations tomorrow so they can rest. Before doing so, Hickok asks to see the computer analysis on the night Hawkins died. Van Fleet looks back to Wiley before saying yes. The doctor exits the lab first as Hickok checks on the subjects. Wiley asks his superior if it's okay to let the captain see their files, but Van Fleet believes that Hickok won't understand the information anyway. Late that night, Hickok falls asleep while reading the printouts. He's awakened by Tommy, who leads him into the air vents. From there, they see the examination room where they find Kidwell processing Hawkins' body while Van Fleet and Earhart study Jenna's. To the captain's horror, they cut through Jenna's ribs and take out her still beating heart. However, this is only a nightmare as Hickok wakes up back in his room. The following morning, Van Fleet discreetly scolds Earhart for not preventing Hawkins' death from being reported. She reasons that it's a federal law to document the death, but Van Fleet argues that men who make such laws break them every day. The two then head into the lab where they find Hickok asking Wiley about the files. Earhart dissuades him from wasting his time on the records, assuring him that the tests are safe since they only keep the subjects inside the pods for a maximum of 72 hours. Hickok argues that according to their own records, it only takes 5 minutes of being under their deep sleep to reach the same EDS level that Hawkins had when he died. The two doctors still insist that Hawkins' death isn't related to the test, but Hickok reminds them that their experiment is meant for a new method of spaceflight. With that, he needs further proof. Otherwise, he'll have their project suspended. Confident that he can convince him, Van Fleet orders Wiley to bring James to EDS level 31, the same level Hawkins underwent when he died. Hickok also requests to see the subject up close during this, and Van Fleet agrees, much to Earhart's worry. Hickok enters the lab where Kidwell directs his attention to their digital indicator where he can monitor the subject's EDS level. On the other side, Wiley sets the parameters monitors and watches James' EDS level go up. Earhart remains concerned, but Van Fleet believes that putting James at level 31 should be safe. Soon, James reaches EDS level 31, but Hickok notices the letter A next to the digits. He borrows Kidwell's headset and points out to Van Fleet that Hawkins died while at level 31F. Van Fleet claims that the sublevels A to Z are insignificant, but this only convinces Hickok to insist on taking James to level 31F. Wiley and Earhart warn Van Fleet against this, but the doctor argues that they have no choice. Upon learning that Hawkins was at level 31F for 35 seconds before they lost control, Van Fleet proceeds with increasing the levels. Soon, James reaches 31F, and the captain waits for signs of trouble. During this, Kidwell sees Van Fleet gesturing to her, so she leaves the room. The others wait as Wiley counts the seconds. After passing the 30-second mark, Hickok sees James' lips twitch. Kidwell also finds his heart rate rising, though Van Fleet thinks this is fine. After 45 seconds, Van Fleet gets nervous, praying that the captain will make this stop. Finally, Hickok doesn't see further signs, so he allows them to decrease the levels. Van Fleet hurries Wiley to adjust the levels while the captain exits the room. Unbeknownst to them, James' veins begin to swell. Wiley also encounters a malfunction in the system as something is overriding the program. When he checks where the override is coming from, he gets the name John Doe as a response. Wiley and Van Fleet are horrified to see this. Suddenly, the health monitor blares as James' heart rate reaches over 114. Hickok joins them just in time to see Wiley panicking as the system goes haywire. Earhart tells him to terminate the program, but Van Fleet knows this isn't possible. Soon, pipes start leaking and James' blood vessels erupt until his head explodes. The pod also explodes, and the shockwave throws everyone back. Automated shutters then block the window to protect the control room, putting everyone in darkness. The power is cut throughout the facility, making both Mrs. Cutter and Tommy worry. After recovering from the shockwave, Wiley checks his computer and assures everyone that their backup generators have kicked in. Jenna's pod is also functional. With this, Van Fleet calls Kidwell to check on Jenna, though Wiley warns them to use protective gear since their dioxide and ammonia lines are leaking. Still, Hickok volunteers to check with the doctors. As the trio set up their suits, Earhart reports that they've lost control of Jenna's pod, so they can't control her EDS level. They soon find that James' pod is broken, but Jenna seems to be intact with minimum damage. Meanwhile, Wiley manages to access the heat sensors in the lab, allowing him to monitor their movements as they prepare to transport Jenna to the airlock. However, Wiley notices something else in the lab, so he checks the system and finds out that it's John Doe. Seeing this, Earhart warns the others that John Doe is there. Hickok asks who that is, but instead of answering, Van Fleet seals himself inside the lab. Alone, he searches the area but is unable to see their enemy. Suddenly, he comes face to face with a disfigured creature, whom he calls Madam Pip. Then, the team can only listen as the doctor screams in pain. Once the scream stops, something bangs on the shutters, leaving dents on the metal. Panicked, the team reconvenes in the pantry where Earhart and Kidwell explain how, taking their subjects beyond normal levels of dream state sleep, they discover that their subconscious connects to a parallel dimension. This allowed their subjects to interact with a being from the other dimension, whom they named as John Doe. Unconvinced by this story, Cutter decides to leave, only for Tommy to reveal that their main airlock to the exit is sealed. This was a safety feature installed to prevent radioactivity from leaking from the place. They also can't communicate with the outside since their main transformer is busted. Later on, Wiley tells the rest that all sensors indicate that nobody is in the lab anymore, so John Doe and Van Fleet are gone. Earhart insists that there's no way out of the lab, but Tommy reminds him that they had him install a water drain into the floor. Hickok doubts that the creature could fit into a water drain, but Wiley gives Earhart an analysis of John Doe's chemical structure, which suggests that it can expand and contract its molecular structure at will. This makes Tommy worry about how they can kill it. Wiley assures everyone that John Doe shouldn't be able to get into the control room since it's airtight. However, since their transformer's not working, they might also run out of air. With that, Hickok believes fixing the transformer should be their priority, but since Tommy doesn't know how to do do that, Wiley volunteers to do it. However, someone needs to keep Jenna safe. They can't wake her until the transformer is fixed, and her life support packs will only keep her alive for 2 more hours, giving them limited time to get things working again. And so, Hickok and Wiley head to the lower levels, seeing the transformer sparking electricity. Meanwhile, Earhart reviews their documents but hears a scream from afar. Elsewhere, Kidwell recognizes the scream as one of her monkeys, so she heads to her lab to check. The animals are on edge and one of the cages is destroyed. Kidwell calls up Cutter from the kitchen to report that one of the monkeys, Bingo, got out. With this, Cutter orders Tommy to find the monkey. Later on, Cutter hears her trap catch another rat. However, when she replaces the mouse trap into the vent, something attacks her arm. She screams just as a giant mouse-like head breaks out of the wall. Overhearing the commotion, Earhart uses the intercom to ask what's happening, but no one responds. Kidwell reaches the storage level and hears something moving in the darkness. She follows the sound to the overhead pipes but is instead surprised by a rat. This causes her to fall back to the floor. Finally, she sees Bingo, who runs to her. Soon, Hickok and Wiley turn the power back on, and thankfully it works, but only for a minute. The wires erupt in sparks again, and Wiley concludes that they can't repair them anymore. Kidwell manages to return to her lab with Bingo, and through the intercom, she reports to Earhart. Tommy chimes in from the kitchen, telling them that Cutter is missing. Kidwell assures him that she found Bingo, but the man claims that the monkey is there with him. To her horror, the monkey in her lab transforms and attacks Kidwell, while Tommy and Earhart can only hear her scream. Tommy then discovers Cutter's body, so he screams as he rushes to the elevator. Hickok and Wiley hear him, so they follow him, but Tommy panics when the elevator won't activate. As Hickok and Wiley search in the darkness, Tommy ends up in the hallway to the maintenance level, carrying a shotgun. A leaky pipe causes him to panic, so he starts shooting at random. The other men follow the gunshots, but soon, Tommy runs out of bullets. By the time they reach the hallway, they only see a bloody mess left behind by their maintenance worker. Sensing danger, Hickok pulls Wiley to run. Desperate to escape, Wiley attempts to hotwire the elevator to activate it, which eventually works. Hickok quickly enters, but the door closes before Wiley can get in. The captain desperately tries to pry it open for him, only to see Wiley get attacked. Despite getting into the lift, the elevator still doesn't move, so Hickok climbs out of the shaft and into the vents. This leads him back into the facility. Meanwhile, a troubled Earhart waits for reports from the others when she hears a banging on the door. The doctor cautiously listens for further movement outside and soon unlocks the door, revealing Hickok on the other side. He reports that Wiley and Tommy are dead. She recounts that Kidwell's also gone, though she's not sure what happened to Cutter. Amidst the danger they're facing, Earhart is still fascinated by the creature hunting them down. She plays her last conversation with Kidwell, which suggests that John Doe took the shape of Bingo. Earhart also recounts how Van Fleet uttered the name Madam Pip before his death, which was apparently the name of a carnival performer who scared him as a child. Since Kidwell was thinking of Bingo before she found the creature, John Doe might be able to take the form of whoever they're thinking of. Earhart is simply awed by this, yet Hickok reminds her that it just slaughtered her coworkers. Suddenly, their power reactivates, confusing them. Earhart sees the computer processing something, making her believe that someone's trying to access their files. When she tries to access the same files, she's blocked as John Doe has overridden the permissions. Concerned, Hickok wonders what it wants, so Earhart uses the computer to ask it. She gets a response, hinting that the creature wants to return to its world since it can't adapt to their environment. The captain's glad that it's dying, but Earhart reminds him that John Doe might have been the one who activated their power. This means it wants to make a deal with them since it needs Jenna to open the dimension. Hickok refuses to let her induce Jenna to open the dimension, given how it already killed James. He volunteers to do it instead, but Earhart explains that he needs to have 8 hours of REM sleep before he can be induced. She assures him that she knows what to do, offering to close the dimension before Jenna gets harmed. If they don't do this, all 3 of them will die anyway. With no choice, Hickok helps Earhart prep Jenna for EDS. He replaces Jenna's pod in the lab cautiously, ensuring that the creature isn't there. Under Earhart's guidance, he reconnects her pod to the supply lines. Soon, however, Earhart sees something growing from the heat sensor. The captain senses something too, so he looks around the area. Earhart confirms that the creature is moving towards them, so she orders Hickok to get out, promising that it won't harm Jenna since it needs her. Hesitantly, Hickok returns to the control room where Earhart has already begun putting Jenna in into level 31 EDS. Jenna soon reaches level 31F and the others monitor her vitals. Her blood vessels soon swell, so Earhart decides to bring the woman back down without opening the dimension. Despite this, the dimension opens, making Earhart believe that Jenna is controlling it. With that, they check the heat sensors, seeing the creature approach the woman inside before heading toward the open portal. Amazed, Earhart decides to see the portal herself. She rushes into the lab despite Hickok's protest, and there, they find a beam of light that divides their world from John Doe's. The scientist approaches the light with a broken pipe, which gets sucked into the portal. Meanwhile, Hickok checks on Jenna and finds her pod electrified. He warns Earhart only to find her missing. The woman soon steps out of the portal, having seen what's on the other side. Before she can say anything about it, however, John Doe stabs her with a pipe, killing her. Hickok is horrified as the creature drags Earhart back into its world. With only him left, he attempts to wake Jenna to close the portal. Unable to override the system, he grabs an axe and destroys the machine instead. This causes an eruption which sends him flying, knocking him out. Moments later, Hickok wakes up to find the laboratory quiet except for a thudding sound. He follows the noise and finds Jenna awake and trying to break out of her pod. He releases the woman who's confused about the mess in the lab. She asks what happened, and the captain can only say that it was a long story.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.